It's a great joy for me to return to Rome to share this series of talks of what I think may be the key role of science in the new evangelization. I wish to thank Father Rafael Pascual for his continued friendship and support, and in particular for making this event possible. I would like to also acknowledge Father Pedro Barrajon for his constancy throughout the years. Before I start, I would like to extend my gratitude to all of you for being here at Regina Apostolorum. As we celebrate the Year of the Faith, I sincerely hope that you will find these talks edifying. Today's presentation is entitled Jesus, the Hypotenuse, the Only Way to the Father. Yes, I do realize that this title is a bit strange, but you shall see here, in the very spirit of Fides et Ratio by Pope John Paul II, how such an assertion is true, as it will be explained step by step in a logical progression. The thesis of this work is that we humans, with the gift of a soul, may learn from recent advances regarding natural complexity in order to find the peace of Christ and share the good news in a noble way. As a reminder, here is a right triangle having legs A and B and a hypotenuse C, satisfying the celebrated Pythagorean theorem A squared plus B squared equals C squared. As is seen, this triangle has two equal legs, and if they are 1 unit long each, the hypotenuse would measure the square root of 2, which represents the shortest distance from the bottom left to the top right. This is true despite our inability to know the precise meaning of the ... here, as the number is irrational and has an infinite expansion without repetition. As you shall note, this talk contains a few simple games that illustrate how fragmentation happens. Here is the first one. This is a game for kids, one easily understood modeling clay. Drawn here on top is a bar of clay as it comes out of the box. The game starts cutting the bar by a given factor, say 70% from the left, as shown by the vertical line. Then the game continues, piling up the largest piece to the left and enlarging the second piece also to the left, so that they make two contiguous uniform bars with equal horizontal lengths. Clearly, the first piece is higher than the original bar, and the second piece is lower. The game continues repeating the same process on each piece, using the same proportions. At the next level, there are 4 rectangles whose masses are, from left to right, 70% of 70%, or 49%, 30% of 70%, or 21%, 70% of 30%, or the same 21%, and 30% of 30%, which gives 9%. Clearly, 49 plus 21 plus 21 plus 9 gives 100%, in virtue of the well-known principle of conservation of modeling clay, something that does not work well if there are little kids at home. The next level contains 8 pieces, and the most massive rectangle continues to grow in height. As the base of such a piece is half of a half of a half, or 1/8, and as the area equals 0.7 cubed, the height gives 1.4 cubed, which is 2.74 times higher than the height of the original bar. What the game produces may be calculated easily for arbitrary partitions P and Q. At the first level of the game, beneath the initial bar, the masses are precisely P and Q. At the second level, one finds in order P of P or P squared, Q of P, P of Q, and Q squared, which is no more than the familiar expansion of P plus Q all squared. At the next level, one gets P plus Q all cubed, For the masses from level to level are found just multiplying by p to the left and by q to the right. As may be noted, all is related to the famous Pascal's triangle shown here and the associated binomial theorem expanding p plus q to a power n, and the game defines a properly named multiplicative cascade. Here is what happens when the game is repeated 12 times, when p equals 0.7. We obtain 2 to the 12, 4096 rectangles with very small bases equal to 1 over 2 to the 12. And the original bar is broken into many thorns, which prick us if we touch them from above. As the vertical scale increases dramatically due to the successive pileups, the diagram that would have been 1.4 to the 12 or 56.69 units in height is compressed here so that it may fit on the page. As is seen, the thorns are ordered in layers according to the expansion of p plus q to the 12 and Pascal's triangle. The highest thorn occurs once and contains p to the 12 of the mass. The smallest rectangle on the right happens also once and is almost invisible as it has only q to the 12, that is 0.3 to the 12 of the mass. Then the object has 12 large thorns with masses p to the 11 times q, 12 small thorns, also invisible, with p times q to the 11, 66 thorns with p to the 10 times q squared, and so on. As may be seen, the layers of thorns are finely intertwined and increase in density as we enter into Pascal's triangle from both sides. When the game is played many more times, the additional fragmentation gives rise to infinitely many layers of thorns of infinite sizes that, by lacking any cohesion due to the presence of gaps, are supported by a dispersed collection of points that have the structure of dust. As ultimately there are infinitely many such dusts, one per inside layer, the fracture and thorny object generated by this game is known as a multifractal. Certainly, walking on this object is quite a challenge, for to visit someone at the same level of mass requires going up and down many times, as thorns for all levels end up separated by holes. To fully appreciate the empty structure on every layer of the first game, it is pertinent to introduce another game for kids. This one is also played with modeling clay, but instead of cutting the original bar by its 70%, it is done by the middle, piling up left and right so that there is a hole of size 1/3 by the middle, as shown. As before, this game progresses repeating the same idea, dividing each piece and piling up left and right in the same proportions. For each level, this process creates a collection of equally sized rectangles that, by construction, never touch, hence defining a rather efficient way to produce perfect spaghetti. Clearly, this simple game is another multiplicative cascade that eventually generates thorns of equal size, emanating from a collection of points that, by being separated by gaps, have, once again, the structure of dust. It happens that by varying the size of the hole, say from 1/3 to an arbitrary size h, this construction adjusts the topological sparseness of the layers in the first game. While the denser layers require the propagation of smaller holes, those that are more dispersed correspond to larger holes. The moral of the story is that the two games you have learned, although seemingly different, are at the end intimately related to each other. Both are divisive cascades, and the second lives inside the first on each one of its layers. To further appreciate the games, and as they give rise to thorny objects, containing nothing individually while growing to an infinity that cannot be drawn, it is convenient to consider their accumulated masses from the beginning, 0, to a point x that varies from the beginning to the end, or from 0 to 1. As such, the two cascades on the left yield the accumulated objects shown on the right, where C of x is the total amount of modeling clay from 0 to x. The curious profiles on the right are easily found following the dynamics of the games as follows. For the first game, we obtain a cloud profile like the one produced by an explosion that contains a great multitude of horizontal vertical notches. The most notorious happens when x equals 1/2 and has a height of 0.7, and such is the case as from the beginning to the middle of the spiky object there is, by construction, 70% of the mass. As seen, there is a notch at x equal a quarter with height 0.49, which is the aforementioned 70% of the mass, and so on. For the second game, we find a host of plateaus that correspond to the successive holes on such a cascade. Clearly, the largest one happens from 1/3 to 2/3 and has a height of 1/2, as half of the mass was piled up to the left. Then, there are two plateaus with length 1/9, a third of a third, and heights a quarter and 3/4, and so on. As is seen, the accumulated sets are mathematical monsters with many points where tangents cannot be defined. While the first profile has no derivatives at any point, the second one does not have them at the extremes of the infinitely many plateaus. As there are notches and plateaus everywhere, both accumulated objects turn out to be locally flat. As a consequence, their distances from bottom left, 0, 0, to top right, 1, 1, are at the end equal to 2 units, one horizontal plus one vertical. Remarkably, walking such profiles requires doing infinitely many horizontals and verticals, which yields a maximal length of 2. It happens that such a property is universal, for when imbalances P or holes H, no matter how small, propagate, such define thorns and dust that give rise to accumulated objects containing notches or plateaus everywhere. The same happens when combining the games, yielding cascades with imbalances and holes, and also when chance is used to define variable imbalances and holes from level to level. As the jagged profiles given by the cascades are locally flat everywhere, if one were to parachute on them, one would believe to have landed on flat ground. Because of this clear deception, and due to the fragmentation of the games, such profiles are appropriately known in physics and mathematics as devil's staircases. It happens that the first game for kids is related to the way turbulence happens in nature, the very common process that scares us while riding an airplane. When the inertia of a fluid, given by the product of its velocity v and a characteristic length L, subjugates the fluid's cohesion, given by its viscosity nu, that is, when the Reynolds number shown here on the right is sufficiently large, the fluid breaks into an irreversible chain of eddies, which divide into eddies that divide into eddies, and so on. Those inwardly rotated elements, traveling from more to less pressure, or from plus to minus, as in hurricanes, carry with them unequal amounts of energy that remarkably correspond to the layers of the first cascade, when the imbalance P equals precisely 70%. Turbulence turns out not to be predictable, however, for nature's eddies, from a step to step, are not always higher to the left, but rather happen left or right as guided by chance. Inescapably, when the scale of those eddies becomes sufficiently small, the energies carried by them dissipate in the form of heat. Even though the higher the Reynolds number, the longer the process lasts, a natural cascade, as opposed to what may be done mathematically, turns out to be finite. Notably, and as reported by Menevo and Srinivasan, observations for several flows, both natural and in the laboratory, and including atmospheric turbulence, boundary layer, and wake of a cylinder, yield layers of energy along one dimension that are just permutations of what is produced by the first game for kids. So that you may fully appreciate the goodness of the universal fit found by such investigators, here is shown the relationship between the magnitudes of the layers and their respective densities. While the squares denote the observations of turbulence, the parabola corresponds to the 70-30 cascade with densities that increase as we enter Pascal's triangle from both sides. As the increase in entropy in turbulence happens universally via a simple cascade, common sense suggests we may employ such a process, and also the one defining its layers, to study how we humans create our own turbulence. After all of us, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, are confronted by inertial forces that break our internal cohesion, and when such happens, for sufficiently high Reynolds numbers, such produces our turbulent behaviors, ultimately leading to violence. For even if we want to deny it, many times we make mistakes and break what we should not, repeating the same error again and again. In this spirit, while the first game may be used to vividly describe the proliferation of inequalities generated by our competitive and preferential instincts, and leading to the marked cynicism of modern life, the second cascade may be employed to represent the appalling effects of discriminations and the related distrust and fear that result while imposing equality by force. Note how these simple ideas and their associated diagrams properly reflect not only the political systems that have governed the world, but also, more importantly, our own selfish postures and actions. What else could be the cause for us playing silly games? For, as seen vividly in the rotating negative spirals, these simple notions sadly express why the third world, made of 2/3 of the people in the world, that is 0.666 ... of all, live in poverty. Why 6,000 kids die every day due to lack of water, and why we have been living for a really long time in an era of violence and terror. Although the drawings here may appear funny to some, notice that they are not, as relationships, friendships, and marriages fail by either one of these cascades or their combinations. As history has proven that the second game does not work due to its conspicuous emptiness and falling walls, it is relevant to ask, even if such equation is inadequate or politically incorrect to some, if the globalization of the first cascade is the solution to the problems we face. In this sense, it is useful to remember Pascal's triangle to perform some simple calculations. If the imbalance P is set at 70%, as in nature, and if n equal 20 levels of the cascade are considered, one may study where the modeling clay is located. As such, the 5, 10, 20, and 40% of the largest thorns contain in order 57, 70, 84, and 95% of the mass. Sadly, these numbers adjust the skewed wealth distribution of the most powerful nation on earth, the United States, by the end of the 20th century, circa 1998. For the richest there had, for the same percentiles, 59, 71, 84, and 95% of the resources. This is an undesired coincidence that provides, however, a truthful warning and a cruel morale. If imbalances continue their propagation, as they appear to do in the 21st century, the laws of physics and common sense assure us that energy shall dissipate and that we all shall bite the dust. This warning certainly applies not just to a single country, but all over our world, as any nation's wealth distribution may be adjusted via a multiplicative cascade that gives a devil's staircase, even if it requires variable partitions from level to level. Based on these reflections, we may see that there is indeed a common sense code for true peace, and against violence, one easily defined by the following imperatives. Run cascades in reverse to repair what is broken. Live at low Reynolds numbers in order to avoid any violence and the anxieties of modern life. And, to quote ancient prophets, cut mountains and fill valleys to restore unity. For both graphically and mathematically, reconciled unity is composed of infinitely many outward and loving spirals, traveling unnaturally from less to more or from minus to plus, that are opposed to the negative eddies in polar coordinates induced by the diabolic power of the air. For it is the devil himself, the ruler of the power of the air, as well as the ruler of the world, who is, by his cascading division, our common enemy. He is the one who falsely whispers in our ears that death is victorious, and that brotherhood is an unachievable utopia in this world, of which he is the prince of disorder. Based on these observations, we may see by ourselves that there is a unique geometric solution left, and an associated straight ramp of accumulated clay right. There is 50% of the mass from the beginning to the middle, 25% up to a quarter, and so on, that reflect the fact that we should not play any divisive games, but instead do good to defeat evil. Clearly, the key is in dynamically maintaining the original bar, as it came out from the paradisiacal box of level 0, always practicing the proverbial 50-50 without exceptions, that is, without holes. This means spiritually growing so that we may fulfill the sanctifying power of 0 that yields unity with God. For the uniform bar is the only straight and solid condition which, by not containing thorns or dust, we may walk safely without fear. As we may see, once again by ourselves, this solution is none other than our Lord Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, who by maintaining the straight path and never playing false games, that is, by never lying and hence being truthful, kept always the essential energy, defeated death, and is alive. As the accumulation of the uniform bar results in the one-to-one line, again Jesus Christ in his relation to each one of us, and as such a ramp has a minimal distance of a square root of 2 from bottom left to top right, we may see why the hypotenuse of the triangle, while reflecting unitive and radical love, is indeed the path of and to peace. For the wholesome truth travels efficiently and justly with a slope of 1, while the divisive diabolic games produce crooked devil's staircases that are as long as the legs of the same triangle. The morale is then that we ought to humbly rectify when needed and love God and everyone in order to find true joy, as we have been told. For in the hypotenuse simple equation y equal to x, we may see once again a crucified silhouette of the one on a positive cross, whose sacrifice represents the antidote of dust, which is dissipation, which is death. Although these connections may be surprising to some, even some who wholeheartedly work on the new evangelization, they end up being very useful to explain the good news in the huge difference that exists between devil's staircases and the divine ramp. For if we were to parachute on the hypotenuse, we would end up sliding to the bottom, which is nothing else but the origin, with capital O, a consistent location with Jesus' famous proclamation that nobody can arrive to the Father except through him, that is, via the hypotenuse. Notice that there is no other choice, as it is impossible to go off on a tangent on a devil's staircase, which, as we saw, is locally flat everywhere. To emphasize the uniqueness of true equilibrium, here is the improbable point in the midst of a sea of possibilities expressing all cascades that combine in balances P and holes H. As there are devil's staircases everywhere, we may note that it's indeed hypocritical to judge others when away from the point, as there are negative logs everywhere. And since the point is merely a speck within a space, it is indeed easier for a camel to pass by the eye of a sufficiently large needle than to find the essential point. At the end, however, there is an appointed, faithful algorithm, a veritable sacrament, guaranteeing our arrival to the point, confronting our selfishness. Such corresponds to repentance and rectification, which may be further appreciated noting that if the cascade is performed for only a finite number of levels, it produces a convex up surface from which we can slide to the point of true balance just by recognizing the gravity of our faults. For there is a marked difference between the selfish spiral of number 6 and the always loving unitive and positive of number 9, as there was darkness between such precise hours when Jesus died for us, crowned by our multiple thorns. These ideas remind us of our personal and collective options: equilibrium or turbulence, calmness or violence, rectitude or wickedness, 50-50 or inequities, the shortest or the longest, reconciliation or separation, integration and its slender S, or division and its negating symbol, for the love of money is the root of all evil, wholeness or emptiness, unity and its outward spirals, or dust and the diabolical fraction, and quite geometrically, a positive outlook to the future or a negative attitude trapped in the past, as may be inferred placing the spirals on a clock. I would like to share now a song called Pathways. Two options before us, two pathways ahead. The one is the longest, the other is straight. We journey directly or go by the legs. We follow intently or end up in pain. By walking the flatness or hiking the spikes, we travel in lightness or take serious frights. The incentive is unity and the call proportion. The key is forgiveness and the goal true notion. In wandering wickedness there is never fruit, but in ample humbleness one encounters the root. There is no excuse. Oh, listen, my friend, is by the hypotenuse, or else by the legs. There is no solution, but walking straight. The spikes of disorder insinuate the way. There is a best pathway, the palpably smooth, is by the hypotenuse, and walking in truth. There is one solution, I tell you the truth, is by the hypotenuse, and walking in truth. For any other pathway would lead us astray, is by the hypotenuse, there is no other way. Oh, listen, you brother, let's brighten the day. Is by the hypotenuse, there is no other way. Otherwise the devil shall pull by the legs. Is by the hypotenuse, or else by the legs. For such road is fractal, as long as it gets, is by the hypotenuse, or else by the legs. Oh, let's mend the broken, growing to the root, is by the hypotenuse, the one that yields fruit. Let's keep equilibrium, avoiding dark suit, is by the hypotenuse, the one that yields fruit. Oh, listen, you brother, a cancel from science is by the hypotenuse, the simplest design. I tell you, integrating, don't leave it to chance, is by the hypotenuse, the simplest design. Now, very close to the end, I would like to remind you of other coincidences of faith that you may visualize based on the concepts of science in this talk. Clearly, this presentation follows the spirit of fellow hydrologist John the Baptist, as he baptized with water, who with Jesus called us to rectitude when they said, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." This is the case as the one crying out in the desert, perhaps a little bit myself, also described, together with Prophet Isaiah, the key geometric algorithm defining the broad valley in which the glory of God is revealed, by stating that every valley shall be filled, and every mountain and hill shall be made low. The winding roads shall be made straight, and the rough ways made smooth. The ideas also remind us of some precise statements. Such include Jesus' command that we ought to forgive others 70 times 7 times, as seen allegorically in the second level of the natural cascade in the product of 0.7 times 0.7. The statement by the prophet Isaiah that our strength lies in quiet and trust, that is, at low Reynolds numbers, and God's edict that sinners who love violence shall lick the dust like the serpent. At the end, the notions are very old, for God prescribed to Adam not only the appointed dust to his sin, but also the decree that the ground shall bring forth for him thorns and thistles. For it is indeed true that one is with or against Jesus, for as he said, "Whoever does not gather with me scatters, as does the one who rules the wind and wishes our division." How wonderful is it to appreciate the precious gift of reconciliation that God offers us. For it makes a difference such as far as the east is from the west, and as far as the square root of 2 is from 2. How lovely it is, and how powerful, when 2 or more find the root. For unity may be understood geometrically, and 1 plus 1 is not just 2, but by the cross of love, a larger 1, as explained by Jesus regarding marriage, between a man and a woman, of course, and his bride, the church. Now to end, and giving you thanks for your attention, I would like to share another song entitled 609. I hope you like it. 609, a dear song. Numbers unfolding day long. 609, a clean gong. Symbols inviting us to love. From 6 to 6, revolving inwards. From 6 to 6, I went downwards. From 6 to 6, dividing selfishly. From 6 to 6, lying endlessly. From 6 to 6, trying to be a rose. From 6 to 6, being only a nasty thorn. 609, a dear song. Numbers unfolding day long. 609, a clean gong. Symbols inviting us to love. From 6 to 0, I tapered my speed. From 6 to 0, the tempest did not lead. From 6 to 0, I no longer postponed. From 6 to 0, I finally atoned. From 6 to 0, I experienced peace. From 6 to 0, my loneliness ceased. 609, a dear song. Numbers unfolding day long. 609, a clean gong. Symbols inviting us to love. From 0 to 9, the spiral turned over. From 0 to 9, I dare to love others. From 0 to 9, I attempted prayers. From 0 to 9, I became a repairer. From 0 to 9, infinity flowed free. From 0 to 9, unity grew in me. 609, a dear song. Numbers unfolding day long. 609, a clean gong. Symbols inviting us to love. From 9 to 9, weaving my reality. From 9 to 9, dreaming its totality. From 9 to 9, conquering my greed. From 9 to 9, planting a new seed. From 9 to 9, despite a clear spite. From 9 to 9, knowing there is light. Thank you very much for your presence. For additional information, please refer to the two books, The Fig Tree and the Bell, and The Hypotenuse.